I'm speaking to Patrick Rick Michaels Jr., who's the founder and CEO of the CEA Group. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, I'm grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Let's take you back to 1973 when you founded the CEA Group. If you can give me a little sense of what your vision was at that point.
Well, I was always interested in media. In fact, in the mid-1960s, after being at London School of Economics, I became the first American disc jockey on the pirate radio stations offshore UK, which sort of fueled my interest in communications. Later, I got a master's degree in communications at the University of Pennsylvania's Annenberg School of Communications, so I was looking for a career. And so in 1968, I went to work for the Los Angeles Times, when cable TV was really just starting out in America. And so I spent a few years working with them, and then formed this company in 1973.
And the opportunities really were unlocking some of the experience that you'd had as a journalist and then working for a cable TV network.
Well, what I found was that this, in the early days, was an entrepreneurial business. It actually started in 1948, but didn't really take off until the 1960s. And so the small companies didn't have the financial expertise to attract the type of financing they need to grow and scale. And I'd spent 1 year before I started this with a fund that lent money to cable operators. So it was very early days, even before satellite. So cable was really an antenna service. But what I saw was that it was an industry that was going to grow very rapidly, and especially when satellite came in to carry the programs, which happened in 1975. And so the business was going to accelerate, and I wanted to be part of it.
In your corporate career, you have operated in 60 countries and traveled to 110, perhaps even more, if you look at a later update. But you pretty much a global operator, given the depth and breadth of your expertise across so many geographies.
Well, we were fortunate enough to ultimately have 11 offices around the world in different countries. So we were in investment banking, or merchant banking as people sometimes call it. And we were in private equity. We had $1.2 billion in funds, locally managed around the world, investing in media, entertainment, and telecoms. We were, I think, quite successful on the investment side of the business. And we were very fortunate to be able to work for a lot of the large companies that were expanding globally, like Rupert Murdoch, John Malone. So it was just a time of starting early enough to know the real global giants, Dennis O'Brien, who founded Digicel. Working for those people, working with them as their careers grew, was very beneficial to a small company like ours.
Having been at the coalface of the media environment for such a long time, so to speak, what are your thoughts on the changing dynamics right now?
Well, the industry continues to change like kaleidoscopically. So it's like a kaleidoscope. You shake it up, look at it, it's a different thing every day. But some of the
It's difficult to keep up.
Yes, some of the major trends globally are continued scale. So the big guys are getting bigger. Doesn't matter whether it's Naspers in South Africa, or it's Verizon, or Vodafone, or Sony. And it's convergence, because how people communicate, how they're informed, and how they entertain themselves is what this business is all about. And the economies of scale, particularly at the global level, really dictate larger companies. And I think that trend will continue. The recent AT&T announcement of AT&T, their attempt to acquire Time Warner Cable, the programming assets, is just a continuation of that trend. So you have AT&T. Over the years, they got in, ultimately a telephone company, old telephone company, got into mobile. Then they got into cable by acquiring assets from Liberty. Then they bought DirecTV, and now they're getting into television production and content distribution. So it's vertical and horizontal integration. And I think that merger will probably happen. I was asked that question twice since I've been here. I think it'll actually happen.
You think it will happen. The proliferation of broadband and costs and controls associated with that proliferation. Can you weigh in on that discussion?
I can, because the thing that's interesting here is that if you look at information, entertainment, the things that the consumer really want to have, content may be king. And people want whatever it is, or they want to play games, or they want to watch movies, or they want to communicate, or social media, that you have to have distribution. So it's how you distribute, in fact, multiple forms of distribution, not just one, multiple forms of distribution. It leads to the biggest question of all is what consumers will pay for it and how will you monetize this. You can
exactly. What are the monetary operating models here?
So each one is different, but in games, for example, used to, in the early days, you'd buy games for your PC. Ultimately, the big business turned into multiplayer games. So people playing against each other. I mean, look at China, it's the games capital of the world. Companies are market caps of several billion. And people are willing to pay small amounts of money to play.
So then it's a volume game.
It's a volume game. So you look at all of the, across the board in media and entertainment, at the personal level, let's say, rather than going to a cinema or going to a play. I mean, that goes on. But at that personal level, the question is, what are they willing to pay for? What can they pay for, afford to pay for? And for the companies, how do you actually collect it? Because at the end of the day, if you don't have a mechanism to collect it, then you've got a problem. So one way to collect this without a massive infrastructure, if you're a mobile company like AT&T, you've got the collection systems already for the mobile payers. So as you offer more and more services, you're going to make money and get paid because you're going to collect. And the second thing is, this brings up the question, is broadband, because most of this depends on broadband or Wi-Fi. The operators of the systems will make money on the data traffic. So they make money on cellular.
So the operators will make the money on the data traffic.
Along with the content. So they've got multiple revenue streams. That's the key thing, multiple revenue streams.
When you come to the digital revolution, front and center of that discussion are big data centers. And the big data question as well as cybersecurity. So let's start with big data and how that is changing the game.
Well, big data is affecting the media industry in a number of different ways, not the least of which is knowing what people are consuming and how they're consuming and how they're paying. So big data and market research and for advertisers, that's all important. And it will continue to be important because you're able to look at thinner and thinner slices of people that are using the service and how they're using it. And so that's important. Big data itself as a business is one of the fastest growing, along with cybersecurity, fastest growing businesses because of the amount of data that's out there that needs to be stored, manipulated, transmitted. So those data centers will continue to, that would be a very good business to be in.
Cybersecurity, again, occupying global stages, especially with the current political environment, and we'll come to the US election, but the leaked information throughout the US elections on digital platforms, surely an indication that cybersecurity is something that we really need to worry about into the future.
It ranges from the man in the person with a credit card to identity theft, to intellectual property theft. I was just speaking with a young man here whose wife works for a U.S. medical research company in South Africa, and they're rightfully so. They're paranoid that millions of dollars in research that they're spending here on tuberculosis
could be stolen.
Stolen tomorrow. So the company that may steal it in China or India or wherever, they're not paying anything. But they can actually reproduce and benefit from that. So intellectual property theft is billions globally, billions. And people say, well, how does that affect me here in South Africa? The fact of the matter is they're stealing research done here in South Africa today. They don't have to be in Silicon Valley to make money. So then you have other areas of cybersecurity that are really concerning, which is infrastructure, threats to infrastructure like power stations, hospitals, water systems. So it's a growing area for criminals. It's a growing area for state mischief. And
but there must also be opportunities in all of this.
There are tremendous opportunities in cybersecurity. The biggest problem is shortage of people that are qualified and educated and trained. You don't have to have a 4-year degree or a 6-year degree to be in cybersecurity in the technology side. The thing is there are very few people that are coming out that are qualified, and so you have to accelerate the training program and the certification program for these people. And anywhere that there's job shortages creates wonderful opportunities for those people that can attract people and solutions.
Rick, I want to chat about the US elections and the fact that you are a Republican. Can you give me your sense of, you were in America when the election came to fruition and President-elect Donald Trump?
Actually, I was in Mala.
You were
on
in
election
Mala.
day. But you know what? It was a wonderful day for Republican because I looked out and said to my girlfriend, this is going to be a great day for America, because I saw about 35 elephants crossing the river. I said, it's a good sign for us today.
How do you think US politics will change at this point under
well, I think
new leadership?
The political system is going to change. The political system itself is going to change dramatically, because what you have is the rise of a populist movement. It's not only Trump, but Bernie Sanders for the young people and the left. People are tired of the status quo, so they want change, just a different idea of how do you change
Was this a
things.
vote against the establishment?
I think nationally it was a vote, not only Trump, but Bernie showed that there's a vote against the establishment. And so the question is, it's one thing to be elected, it's another thing to be able to affect the change. And I think that change is coming. And it's a question of what sector. But I think that he is willing to attempt to make the change. But it's not a dictatorship. So we still have Congress. It's fortunate that the Republicans now control both houses.
What impact, and there's a lot of, we're sitting here in an emerging market, there's a lot of fear that Donald Trump, as president, will clamp down on trade with the rest of the world, and that all emerging markets will suffer.
I think that it's a little bit different. His interest in that, speaking as a citizen and not part of the party, which I used to be, as you know, that some of the emerging markets are really going to benefit. Copper was up 30% today, I noticed, which is interesting. I think that the pro-business approach will be important. The countries that will probably, or the places that will have a problem, are export of U.S. jobs overseas without the companies paying for it. But people that already have jobs, they're exporting to the United States. I don't think they're going to find, not everywhere, but I think as far as Africa goes, that'll actually be a positive development. I think for Mexico, it might be problematic for a lot of different reasons. But for this continent, I think more money is going to be spent on infrastructure in the United States. And I think that the interest in seeing parts of the world that he would characterize that could use trade as a powerful economic development tool, this will be good here.
Do you think
not good everywhere, but it'll be good here.
Do you think we'll see a private sector injection into the U.S. administration in terms
yes,
of
very much. I think
the functionality?
I think the appointments will be radically different. So not just career politicians or lawyers. That they'll actually have a number of business appointees.
And that, in your opinion, is net positive to shake up the status quo? Too many politicians?
Well, it can't be all business people. I mean, I think for example, having some academics, I think academics make bad business people, but on the other hand, if you're looking at complicated things like world economics, you need that component part, not just somebody sitting here as a businessman like myself. It's a very sophisticated subject, as you talk about every day on CNBC. So having those teams of people that are not just, we want good civil servants, but you want people to relate to the civil servants that are working on this. So if they say, well, we need to look at commodities, for example, coming out of Africa, and what does this all mean? You need the people that understand that, not just somebody sitting back saying, well, I have 15 car dealerships.
Do you think that President-elect Donald Trump will be good for, one, the United States, and two, for the rest of the world?
I believe that he will. I mean, the key thing is it is not one person. Ronald Reagan told me once, I was involved in the American Conservative Union that elected Ronald Reagan, and I had the privilege of meeting him several times, and he said, you know, I'm not the smartest person in the world. People call me a second-rate television actor, and I'm a third-rate movie star. He said, I use the word star generously. He said, but I'll tell you one thing. He said, I'm a sports fan. He says, I believe being the coach is what I want to do. And having the right people on the team and motivated is the key to success. So if he's willing to say, I'm Donald Trump, but I'm surrounding myself with good people, some of whom are smarter than me, he'll have the right team. And I think that when he settles in, he will find that. And that will be a powerful way to change things for the good.
When you come back to the fact that you've operated in 60 countries globally and visited 110, how do you view emerging markets, specifically the African continent? Do you think it is the last frontier, especially when it comes to the communications landscape?
I think that there's a lot of business opportunity in Africa. The hedge funds and private equity funds are beginning to look here, which they hadn't for years. So I think there's some good signs. I think if you look at the media business itself, or the entertainment business in Africa, there are a few things that you need to look for. One is the local content, just like here. I think that will grow. It's quite expensive, local content everywhere, but people like local content, not just Hollywood. The difference is that in buying foreign content, just look at today, the Rand dropped 5%. So that means if you're buying motion pictures, if you're a service that provides motion pictures, pay TV, your costs have gone up 5% in one day. If you look at the African currencies across the country dropping 60%
huge
or less.
volatility. Can you actually manage a business in that environment?
Well, they're buying content, even whether it's from India or wherever it's from, UK, they're buying effectively in hard currencies here. And so the cost is continuing because the devaluation of currencies go up. So it will be more expensive. You can only raise the rate so much for pay TV or whatever. So I think it will encourage local content, whether it's local game shows, news shows, or whatever. Before it was expensive to do, but there'll be more of that. Because
so you'll
the
see
net
more
effect
content
is less.
generated locally,
Yes,
is what you're saying.
Yeah. You'll see, I really believe that. Second thing is, who makes the money? South Africa has one of the highest broadband rates in the world. And so if you look at the broadband rate in South Africa compared to India, it's quite high. And so in order for, it's not only entertainment or pay TV, it's games, it's information, it's smartphones, it's all of it,
it's
connectivity.
Operating on the global stage from an information and knowledge perspective.
So those companies will continue to make money, those that are collecting for data usage, cell phone. So those companies, like an MTN, is a good business. But what will actually happen is that new things like Wi-Fi service will increase here dramatically. You know, you have it, but it begin to spread access to the web. So looking at as this business show, looking at that is another good area to look at, is proliferation of Wi-Fi. And you brought up data centers. I forgot to mention that secured data centers. There's a new breed of data centers out there because of cybersecurity. The companies that can provide secured data centers or security data centers, that's another good area for Africa to be in. So there'll be a lot of opportunities around it, but things will be slow to change because you've got high infrastructure costs, so it takes a while for it to change.
As you said earlier, the media industry, the communications landscape is looking into a kaleidoscope every day. There's just a myriad of changes and opportunities. Do you think that this is going to continue to change at such a fast, dynamic pace as technology evolves? Will it ever slow down again?
I don't think it'll ever slow down because technology is changing too fast and the usage is changing. And one thing, for example, is social media and content. So the question is, who's using it? So you find with a very young population in Africa, I think the average age is very low. So mobility, shorter content because of the cost of data use. So short form content or social media or interaction, all of that will continue to grow. And out of that, I think you'll see some very interesting entrepreneurial companies. But shorter attention spans, more choices on what you're doing with your time. Not everybody's going to sit down for 3 hours and play a video game.
A great example of how disruptive social media is being is that if you look at the recent Brexit situation and you look at the US election, the pollsters called both scenarios wrong, but the social media environment actually called this one right. So there's a whole new model evolving around communication and new metrics that we actually have to evaluate global decisions by.
Well, there are actually, interestingly enough, talk about big data. There are actually systems that are out there today that have either been developed on their own or they're declassified government systems, been used by intelligence agencies. And so it's possible actually to look across social media, and you talk about the trends, and you can actually forecast, because it's illegal in some places, but intelligence agencies, whether it's GCHQ or NSA, they're able to look across vast numbers of users. So they would be able to adequately, these systems have a better chance of actually forecasting an election, because people are tweeting or they're on Facebook or whatever the case is. They can look at all of them at one time and process the amount of information that would be in the Library of Congress, which is huge, in like an hour. Can you imagine that? So they're looking at all that. So now they're not using it for that, but there are commercial versions that are down from that now are looking at social media, where it's legal to do that, and emails, and so they're much more predictive.
Rick, I also want to get your thoughts on whether the traditional distribution channels in terms of television sets will ultimately disappear from the media landscape. Do you think that channels are under threat from that perspective?
I don't think they'll disappear. I think what's going to happen is that they're going to change, and one of the ways that they're going to change is that the distribution of the content that they produce, they become more content-oriented, content companies producing the content. And how do you actually monetize that? And so you could have a company that does, let's say, travel. That's easy enough to do, because a travel channel, you can effectively have newsletters. You can have electronic newsletters, digital magazines, printed magazines. You can be in the branded tour business. So you're actually running the tours, a company that owns the media. So they're driving people to this. You can sell travel packages online, like e-commerce. You can have affinity programs and membership programs, so you're collecting. So you'd have members that are interested in travel discounts. You give them 15% off if they're a member of the club.
So multiple touch points in any content strategy.
And what you need to look at is the consumers, the people that are using your service. They are who you're selling to. So you want to sell them as many things as you can. But you can't, in my mind, the companies that are the dinosaurs, just as the newspapers, because I started off my career there, they really refuse to believe that things would change. So companies that are solely advertising driven are the next dinosaurs. If you don't figure out the multiple revenue streams, they're going to be the dinosaurs. Costs going up, revenues are shrinking, and it's also cyclical with the economy on advertising. So you've got to have a broader base of revenue.
Well, on that appropriate warning to diversify, I think it's an appropriate point to draw the conversation to a close. Thank you so much. I've been chatting to Rick Michaels Jr., who's the CEO and the founder of the CEA Group. You're watching Captains of Industry here on CNBC Africa, DSTV 410.